Now the biggest amateur wrestling program now is Pennsylvania.
Yep, Penn State.
They're doing fantastic. There's some new rules now that have come into play just this last fall to where you can monetize on your credentials as a high school athlete, to where if you're good enough, they can simply say, well, Josh Barnett, not only are we going to give you a full ride scholarship, but we're going to need to offer you $100,000 over and above that will be paid out over the course of the next 4 or 5 years of your stint. And then you could have a great freshman year, and then all of a sudden you can get other schools that will simply say, well, Josh, you did such a phenomenal job your freshman year. We're going to offer you $200,000 to come over to our program, and there's no penalty. You can actually leave one program, go to the other one, and you don't have to sit out. Before you had to sit out a year. Now it's like you simply just go right in, step right into the lineup, and not thinking, wow. The hard part about that is only the programs with the deepest pockets are going to survive this.
It's true. I don't know exactly how I feel about it in terms of sports. I understand where the argument comes from about the monetization of the athletes and of the sports in general, with television and streaming and everything, every way in which schools and the NCAA can monetize what's happening. But, not to say that there's never been no money in sports, because it's never worked like that. There's always been some incentivization. That's just the way it works. But growing up in the 80s, and Dan growing up in the 1800s,
you had to go there now, did you? You had to go there.
I'm loving this. Keep going.
John Fry, and a few other people. I tell you what, my fanny pack gets picked on all the time. That's okay. That's okay.
But growing up in, what's funny is I have more in common than Dan than most people think, because I too like Ensure. Okay. No, but I actually do have more in common with Dan as an amateur athlete.
I tell you about my most recent sponsor here. That depends. Okay.
I'd take it, and I'm only 46. But if me and Dan do have more in common as athletes, not just from what we did in pro wrestling or fighting, but the time when Dan was an athlete on the rise, from teen to, I don't know, even 30 years old. The way sports worked back then was basically the same as how it was when I was an athlete coming about in the 80s and into the early 90s. There was just a different way of presentation, a different feel. The idea of keeping amateur athletics amateur, and you would be supported by a system that had money pumped into it so that you could have regional training centers, and you could have the Olympic Training Center, you could have different schools with mat rooms and recovery and physical therapists and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, these things would support the athletes, and the athletes would be sent on planes to fly and compete here, and athletes would be brought over from Iran, from the Soviet Union. I mean, that's where, as much as we could be having whatever political issues governmental wise, man, you bring the athletes together, friendships are made for life, because it's a completely different story. And, what I was watching in terms of sports that were the inspirational things to push me when I was really starting to compete in the early 90s in high school, it was all the stuff from Dan's era and just after, because that was what we kept tapping into. These were the manuals we would get. These were the things we would see on television, the references back to athletes that weren't only 3 years ago, was constant. We're always looking backwards and looking at and acknowledging all the things that came ahead. The AAU wasn't really going on in the 90s, but we would still reference AAU because it was so important from a period prior to this. And that's just the way it was. You didn't think about video games and all this other IP exploitation. It just didn't happen. So to see this happening with amateur athletics now, there's a part of me that's just really disappointed. I don't necessarily want athletes to be cheated out of anything that maybe they were deserving because of the incentivizations from the fan base coming to see them. But I don't know. I mean, there's way too much money in these universities as it is. It's a whole different story about how the commodification of athletes and students, and you can go look that administration has grown at a higher in a higher percentage than student body has. The thing that has increased the most in universities is the administration, expenditures, and the money's drawn in, not the education, sadly to say. So there's a part of me that really doesn't like hearing about the monetization, but you think about that, and hell, if you could transfer schools like you can now, back when Wade Chalice was competing, well, his senior year, he'd had an NCAA title because he competed up in weight at 190 or something, weighing 170 some pounds, and he beat everyone in their regional qualifier that would go on to the NCAA. So when you looked at the NCAA, Wade Chalice had pinned the champion, second place, probably fifth, he pinned like all the All-Americans. He'd already kicked all their butts, but he couldn't go to the NCAAs because he had transferred schools to like Clarion or Edinburgh or something like that. So he couldn't qualify.
Wade Chalice, the cradle man.
Oh yeah, the spladle, the cradle. Yeah. Legal pain, brutal half Nelson. I also like the fact
that's where I learned my cradle from. Originally, I put a new little twist onto it, and I pinned a lot of people with the cradle.
And he's got a move he calls the Severn, which was your front headlock, and you get hand control, bing, 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 and then they let you bring it up, and boom, the head goes under. You turn the corner and put them on their back.
Yeah. No, I get it. That's where I delivered even one a cradle to Oleg Tatarov in the Ultimate Fighting Championships.
You did. Was it the Ultimate or the first time? It was the first fight, right?
Yeah, the first fight. As I cradled him, and once I had him cradled, I basically brought my head on up and then shot him a knee shot to the head.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember he was like peeling away at your knee sleeves, just trying to hold on to not get kneed in the head anymore.
Yeah, that was actually the first fight where I had him down on the ground, and he basically had he had an armbar position, but that was the time that you could actually hold on the cage. And I'm sitting there holding on the cage, and he's not gonna, that cage is gonna come down. But when I saw him pulling down on my knee pad, I'm thinking he's pulling on my knee pad. I'm looking where my knee is, just above his head, like going, well, this is gonna kind of suck here a little bit. I just dropped that first knee. It stunned him. I'm thinking, well, he's still fighting here right now. Still, it's like, I'm gonna drop the next one. Next one, it just opened up his forehead. It just split.
Oh, he was bleeding profusely. And yeah, you're right. By being able to hold onto the cage, kept your base. But the other thing is, it was he had his legs on, he had your arm trapped, but the only way he could have finished it was by getting his hips all the way up, which you weren't going to let him. And then the fence, of course, you could hold on to it, but even if you couldn't, he couldn't rotate. If he needed to get a better angle, try and get that arm bar, you'd have to rotate. The fence is in the way. He was stuck. And then you start kneeing him, and